I got into real estate in about 1992, and if back in those days, a couple things were happening. Buyer agency was brand new. If you look around you right now, look at the COVID has created this sort of environment where there's so much office space that's not being utilized because folks are working from home. I've heard of restaurants that are going out of business. I've heard of some major retail chains like Joann Fabrics. They just filed for bankruptcy. They're closing all their stores. I always came out as an analytical person. And over the years, I guess I've become even a little bit more outside of that core quadrant. I've been involved more in public speaking and communicating. I really love doing it, and I get pretty good response when I'm talking to people. The company would send their managers to training classes. We do it in real estate. They do it in the corporate America. And they had these classes where they would sort of determine what your character style was. When you move into real estate, you move from a salaried position with benefits to a entrepreneurial independent contractor. You depend entirely on your commissions to make a living.
If you like to win, you're in the right place. Welcome to Premier Insights Podcast. My name is Raphael Price, and this podcast is custom built for the student and professional athlete. Today, we are blessed to spotlight Mr. Dennis Kozak, President of the Greater Metropolitan Association of Realtors. And today's theme is how to sell your Airbnb vacation rental. A former botanist, for all you plant lovers out there who might want to put some plants in your vacation rental, he's worked in various roles in the agricultural chemical industry for 15 years. Dennis launched his career in real estate while living in suburban Chicago. After moving back to Michigan with his wife of 47 years, Dennis established his real estate career in Michigan. As an active member and musician at his church, Dennis continues to refine his talents as he enriches the lives of others. Currently, Dennis is the president and an active instructor at the Greater Metropolitan Association of Realtors, and he's a licensed professional realtor at Properties Remy. Welcome to the show, President Kozak.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, Raphael.
You're very welcome, and we are so excited to be able to host such an important luminary in our community.
Wow,
so we're going to get right into this.
You're really building this up, aren't you?
Well, we have to. We have to take some marketing tips, from our experts in our brokerage and figure out how we can promote the people around us and highlight the various rich resources we have in the landscape. So we'll start with our first question, President Kozak. Please tell us the story of how you got into real estate after a storied career in the agricultural industry, because many people are trying to figure out how do you connect those dots?
Right. I get that. Well, it's an interesting story, and I'll start in the beginning. I went to school here in Michigan at the University of Michigan, and then over at Michigan State to get my master's degree. And making those two moves, I actually had purchased two different homes, and then from there moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then from there I went to Kansas City, Kansas, and I covered 3 states out that way. As a district sales manager, had some sales reps under me, and then from there moved to Des Moines, Iowa, and then eventually to Chicago. So before I began my real estate career, I had the opportunity to participate in several major, I would call them major real estate transactions because they involved me and my wife. And I learned a lot in that process, of course. And one of the things I witnessed many times is the realtor that was actually servicing us was someone that came to us from a different, probably career or background before they became a realtor. So I always and often said, at some point, if I ever leave corporate America, I would love to perhaps begin a career in real estate. And by golly, the opportunity presented itself probably about 2 or 3 years after we moved to Chicago. The agricultural chemical industry was undergoing some consolidation and some changes. And so our company was being sold and it would have meant me moving again. And already we moved so many times. I promised my wife I wasn't going to put her through that again. And
Mm,
the prospects with the new company weren't anything that would make me feel like let's just jump and move with this new company. So we decided to I decided to leave, and of course my wife was a nurse and was able to hold down a nursing career throughout all of those moves, which certainly helped provide some stability. Because as you know, when you move into real estate, you move from a salaried position with benefits to a entrepreneurial independent contractor. You depend entirely on your commissions to make a living. So anyway, the wife was always supportive and behind me on that. And I got into real estate in about 1992. And if you know anything about the history back in those days, the couple things were happening. Buyer agency was brand new. Prior to 92, all realtors were working as sub-agents for the seller. I hope I'm not getting too technical for the audience here. Is that okay if I talk some of the jargon of the real estate industry?
be sneaking and eavesdropping on the conversation too.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
I said, I'm sure there'll be some realtors eavesdropping on the conversation too, even though
Okay.
this is geared toward our student athletes and professional athletes. But this is
Yeah.
wonderful, so please carry on.
Well, the point is there were some things happening in the marketplace. One was the introduction of buyer agency, which was a change from what we called sub-agency for the seller, where all realtors work essentially for the seller, either directly as a listing agent or as a sub-agent, and they actually were bringing buyers to purchase the home as a quote unquote sub-agent for the seller. So there wasn't any advocacy for the buyer back then. Not
Mhm.
the point of my comment was, though, the real estate market in 1992 was really booming.
Mhm.
Unlike what we face today with shortage of inventory and high interest rates, we had favorable interest rates and a pretty good balance of sellers and buyers in the marketplace. So there wasn't this logjam of inventory, which was slowing down transactions. So it was for someone, new to real estate, but having some background in sales and marketing. That was my corporate background. The
Yes.
technical background, is a different thing. I think when you go to college, you learn how to learn things and assimilate information and, learn how to think, learn how to, make decisions and so forth. So all those things we don't realize lead up to who we are at the moment. Like who I am today is a product of, many years of being on the planet and experiencing many things. So the real estate market was at one of those points where it was just starting to really take off. And I would say to you, and I said this all the way to 2007, when a client would ask me, Dennis, do you think this property will appreciate? Do you think this would be a good investment? I said yes, and based on our recorded history, this property has never gone down in value. Now, can you imagine me saying that after 2007? Because in 2007, the advent of these bad mortgages caused our real estate market to crash.
Mhm.
There was this artificial bubble that was created through this increase of price. Every transaction, a house would sell, and then 3 years later, when it would sell again, it would sell for more money, and so on, creating the appreciation that sellers would, benefit from as homeowners and so forth. But the caveat there was it was probably during the period of these bad mortgages. By bad mortgages, I mean they were risky investments. Lenders were providing mortgages to folks who really should not have been in a position to buy them. They sort of removed a lot of the qualifications that we now go back to. It's like a pendulum. We've swung back to a more of a conservative approach on qualifying buyers to be qualified to get a mortgage and purchase a home. But back in those days, it wasn't. So everything was great up until the 2007, and then property values. You may have experienced things going down as much as 50% of what you had paid for it in recent years. So that was a pretty drastic move. So I can no longer, in my repertoire of comments, and I was being brutally honest with people when I said this property has appreciated ever since it hit the market, and ever since it's been in existence, really, the history of the property. But you can no longer say that as a realtor any longer, because here's an example I just gave you where things don't always stay above water. In fact, sometimes they go below water. So, those are some of my like war stories, I guess, from the front, you might say.
Yes, yes. And you have such an incredible background. I wouldn't expect anything less than such a wonderful, thorough response to that first question. That took up about half the interview.
Oh yeah, I
But
didn't
let's
ask you how much time we have. I should have asked you that, Raphael.
oh, and we have as much time as you have because you're the
Okay.
president, so
All
we
right.
have to work around you.
Well, the other Raphael can edit it out, if it's
That's right.
okay.
And for
All right.
those of you who are wondering, that's my producer. His name, he's got the same name. So for our second question, you have obviously an incredibly diverse and unique trajectory as a scientist, business professional, realtor, real estate investor, and now president of GMAR. But what many people may find especially intriguing is that you are also an accomplished musician. So who influenced your artistry and how have you been able to find a balance with your passion for music and your demanding career in business as an executive, a realtor, and investor?
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you, the musical sort of interest and drive, I guess, began at an early age because my dad was he wasn't a musician, but he really loved music, and there was always music on in the house. And my dad was of the era where big band music was very popular when he was a young man growing up, and he shared that big band music in our house.
Mm.
In the growing up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, or 50s and 60s, I guess mainly. And so I always, it's kind of funny. I always have a radio on in the background, not when I'm in an office environment, but in my home office
Mm.
in the background, even classical music. I have that on the background. I just love the music. I just, and I love all kinds of music. My wife has been a great influence on me on that. But my interest, personally, I guess, stemmed from rock music, probably classic rock and blues music. Believe it or not, I'm a real a fan of blues music. I'm talking about the original blues artists that came up from the Mississippi Delta, even what they recorded down there before they moved up here. But they came into Chicago and really brought their music to a wider audience. And then, of course, bands like the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, and others introduced maybe more of a white audience to that type of music. But I go back to all of the music is sort of rooted back in the blues. Your rock music is a three chord sort of a progression, and if you listen to blues, that's pretty much what that is. So I began to actually play an instrument sort of late in life. I was probably in my mid 30s when I was in Des Moines, Iowa,
Hmm.
of all places. You're kind of this. I don't know. You're out in the middle of the Midwest, and we had a couple of radio stations that would play blues music in Des Moines, but not in the big way until I moved to Chicago. Could I really appreciate the blues? And they have, and you've heard of them here too, open mic nights. And as I started to play and got a little more comfortable, I would go to the open mic nights, and it was kind of a very cool experience where you get met. The guy that's leading the I guess the open mic is usually the band leader for the opening band, and then they do the open mic after the opening band plays a couple sets. Well, anyway, you get paired with musicians that you've never met before, and they all play different instruments. And so here it is. You just say, "Well, what song are we going to play?" And someone would say, "Got my mojo working," or something like that. And they would say, "What key is it in?" And then you have someone lead the song started out, and maybe that person would be the singer, perhaps, and an instrumentalist. And so I got to play like that a little bit, and then I got to meet musicians in Chicago, and say, how do you fit this into a busy career? Well, I was younger when I was doing this, so yeah, it meant maybe I didn't sleep as much. And because sometimes the open mic nights were on a weeknight, and I still had houses to show the next day, or my real estate duties as well. But being a younger person, I was able to manage to do it. Today, probably not so much. I need my rest. But and then I would join a couple of different bands I was with, and we would perform at parties and do some things at some clubs and so forth. But it's a season thing, life is seasons. Right now I'm in a season where I'm not playing as much. I played a little bit last summer because I was preparing to do a short stint at a gig I was in there with another musician friend, and he asked me to sit in with him at a particular gig, and it happened to be a GMAR gig. It was the GMAR RPAC summer event, which is held out at one of our agents' homes in Bloomfield Hills. So it's like a pool party kind of an environment. So what happens, Raphael, is if you have a gig, then you practice. If you don't have it's kind of how life works. If you don't have a gig to perform, you kind of say, well, I don't feel like practicing today, and then the next day I don't feel like practicing. But anyway, so for me, it's a release, and when you're playing the guitar, even at home when I'm just practicing or just playing for the fun, you can't think about anything else about what you're playing. So it's kind of a nice vacation from reality to some degree. And if you've got some things on your mind that are troubling you, you can go away for a little while, and then you come back and maybe, you have a fresh approach. Kind of like sometimes, I'll sleep on it and I'll give you a decision in the morning. Things are a little more clear in the morning. Well, it's sort of the same way with when you play an instrument. So guitar is my main thing. But sorry, I
Yes.
don't know if I divested off the track of the question, but
No, absolutely. The whole point is to help people to get to know you a little bit better before we really get to the bottom line, the big question that people want to know about, how to get that profitable ROI on their vacation rental. And so we're
right.
just asking a few little more questions here to give us kind of a build up to that big one there. Can you share with us how your background as a scientist has enhanced your approach to selling, buying, and investing in real estate?
Yeah, I can. I guess I've in my corporate environment, they would send the company would send their managers to training classes, just like we do it in real estate. They do it in the corporate America, and they had these classes where they would sort of determine what your character style was, and I always came out as an analytical person. And over the years, I guess I've become even a little bit more outside of that core quadrant. I've been, involved more in public speaking and communicating, and for some reason, I really love doing it, and I get a pretty good response when I'm talking to people. So I think the fact that I'm analytical helps. Not that you have to be analytical, but there's certain things you can do uh, before you make a decision to buy something. Sometimes you can overanalyze too, and I don't recommend that. Real estate is a purchase that's normally made out of emotion, and I won't say impulse, but how does it feel? And if it feels right, you're probably going to spend most of your time after you come to that conclusion analyzing why does it feel that way. And so maybe if you have a way of documenting how you feel, such as in the case of a investment property, the income property, let's say that, for example, there are some tried and true methods that are used to analyze a property. They use the income approach, where you analyze all your income coming in from a potential rental property minus your expenses. And if you can afford to buy something without a mortgage, that reduces a huge amount off of the expense when you're doing that calculation. And in the risk of, let's say, maybe you have a vacancy for a while, you're not sweating it as much as an investor who's got a mortgage payment and there's nobody renting the property. So there's a lot of areas to look at, but the income approach, where you analyze things, if you're going to and if you're going to get into even office space and commercial buildings, like newer buildings, and work in that environment with a developer and so forth, they use the cost approach sometimes. But yeah, sometimes the cost approach is used if you don't have a real way to measure income, but you would just value a property that on the cost approach method, that would what would it take to reproduce this property? What would it cost to build this property? And that's how those are valued. If you owned one and you wanted to sell it, that's maybe one of the approaches you would use. So
Sure.
it's an analytical approach, and I
Okay.
think investors, they have the return on investment they're looking for on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So you have to set the rent high enough to cover those expenses, and then you have to look at other things that you can do to maximize your margins and income on the property.
Sure. That's great information. So based on your experience as a real estate investor and realtor, what advice would you give a student and a pro athlete to enhance his or her overall retirement portfolio?
That's a good question too. And I think as you look at the recent marketplace, I would emphasize, if I was asked to do that with a client, maybe focus on residential versus the commercial office space or even retail space. Because if you look around you right now, look at the COVID has created this sort of environment where there's so much office space that's not being utilized because folks are
Yeah.
working from home. I've heard of
Yes.
restaurants that are going out of business. I've heard of some major, retail chains like Joann Fabrics. They just filed for bankruptcy. They're closing all their stores. So if you were involved in any of those real estate transactions or owned and leased those to those companies, because I don't know if they would lease them or buy them. They may have purchased those stores. But my point to you is everybody's going to need shelter, right? Everybody on the planet needs to have a roof over their head. Even, in times of hard economics, and we saw that in Michigan in 2008, 2007, I alluded to that earlier. The first homes that people sort of walk away from are the vacation homes. There was a huge number of people that had second homes up in northern Michigan, and they walked from those, but they were less likely to walk from their primary residences. So not saying that you can't invest in, Airbnbs up in Traverse City and, up in the lakes and things like that. But, if you want to be conservative, maybe you would err on the side of, residential, since I would say that demand is a little bit more predictable. Now,
Yes.
you could still see a decline in, values if the market were to tank again for some reason. I don't anticipate that, but hey, I said that to all my clients up to 2000, from 92 to 2007, and I had egg in my face in 2007. So I've learned not to, I guess anything's possible, but the trends are indicating that it's unlikely that would happen.
Sure. So, in your personal experience as an investor, have you tended to favor what kind of home? Vacation homes, modest single family, or multifamily residential units for income?
In my personal investments, I focused on single family residence in a condo association.
Why the condo association? Because many times it's hard to rent those out, especially if the HOA has to
Yes,
pass laws or what they want to
that's right.
change. So
There
why would
there is a cap on some, so you have to be knowledgeable before you do anything as to what the percentage of home ownership is allowed by that condo association and what percentage is that condo association owned by investors and so forth. But if you can get into a condo, the nice thing about it is all your exterior maintenance is covered, your snow plowing, your lawn mowing and all that. So you avoid a whole aspect of maintenance and service to the rental property. Now, I know some landlords make it part of the lease when they rent a property out as an investor. They rent it to a renter and they allow the renter to cut the grass and the major things that need to be done to the property. The investor would be calling in a professional to do the work. Maybe it's plowing snow, maybe it's repairing things outside the house and so forth. So it just depends on the situation. There are risks too with an association because the condo association could have financial trouble, and there could be some special assessments that come about as a community
Yes.
ages that require every owner, and being that the renter is living there, the homeowner or the investor would be responsible for paying those. Now, whether they could pass those along to the tenant as a rental increase, I guess, that would remain to be seen. But for major projects like roofs and so forth, there's usually sometimes a special assessment if there's not enough funds in the budget, funds collected through normal dues collection at the association level. So,
Do you have any bad experiences, President Kozak, that you've learned from in your early years as a real estate investor?
yeah, I can share one that still I remember clearly. And in a lease, you want to stipulate specifically how you want the tenant to use the property. And with regard to smoking tobacco, I specifically in this particular case with this one tenant had stated in the lease that smoking tobacco of any kind, cigarettes, cigars, pipe, sometimes you have to spell out. Somebody may say, you say cigarettes, but if you don't mention pipes, well, they think you can smoke pipes. Well, you have to be explicit with your comments. So I thought I had the bases covered. No smoking allowed inside the condo. Well, guess what? It's an attached garage. They thought you could smoke in the garage. And I didn't realize this because I hadn't been there for a couple months because everything was going fine. They were paying their rent and I hadn't been, but I had a reason to go back and 3 months into the lease. And I was appalled at the smell inside the garage because they had turned that into a smoking room, I guess. And
Cigar lounge.
a cigar, it was more cigarettes, but both the husband and wife both smoked. So there was constantly smoking going on.
Oh.
And it was absorbed into the drywall
Mm.
to the extent when I, eventually terminated not terminated, they didn't want to renew their lease. I raised the rent and they weren't able to make, reconcile that and they decided to move on. As you know, in a garage, the drywall is 5/8 inch thick, which is thicker than interior walls inside the unit. You can go 1/4 inch. It was so bad that you could open up when you were in the kitchen sink, which, by the way, that kitchen sink backed up to the wall that was adjacent to the garage. You would basically hear or smell cigarette smoke when you opened up the two cabinets below the sink.
Yes.
And it was just so badly. So what I learned in that experience is you have to be more explicit than I was. You have to specifically say no smoking in the house, in the garage, anywhere inside the garage or living space, or be very specific. Because it ended up costing me a little extra money to have that repainted, and I guess all they ended up doing is encapsulating that smell with a paint that I think captured that smell, and because you could walk in the garage even after they moved out, and it's just, well, man, it smelled like an ashtray. And I have nothing against people that smoke. Don't get me wrong there. I'm just saying that if you're trying to rent the house to the next tenant, and they have some sensitivities to that, you've kind of cut your potential rental tenant population down significantly because they don't like that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that with our viewers, because sometimes these are issues that we don't necessarily think about as new investors. And
now with the advent of legalized marijuana, you have to probably be specific, because there's some challenges with folks that have smoked marijuana in a home, because it has a very strong and pungent odor which can embed itself into the drywall, carpeting, drapery, and so forth. And you'd have to maybe stipulate that that's something else that is not allowed.
That's right. That's exactly right. So now we're coming to the question that everybody is here to learn about. And we're going to look at a hypothetical case study.
Okay.
A friend of yours has a friend who is planning to sell his waterfront Airbnb vacation rental. And we're going to assume that nobody was smoking in there. So it's clean. Okay. The air is fresh and clear. It's not going to affect anybody in any way whatsoever to breathe the air in that place. But you want to earn his listing. Walk us through what that process looks like for you and the seller as he or she is marketing both to homesteaders and to investors.
Well, like in any business meeting, you want to, try to get that person to trust you, assuming it wasn't someone that was referred to you, which usually when there's a referral coming in and someone has referred this client to you, there's already a little bit of trust established already. Let's say this is someone that just cold called into the office and wanted me to, come out and talk to them. So you try to establish some trust on the early, engagement that you have with them, and really tell them that your whole purpose for doing this is to really try to get them the highest possible dollar they can. And that you're their advocate. You're not working for any buyers. You're working strictly for the seller. And you might even, as you talk about dual agency and how that's legal in Michigan, but I don't believe in that. I don't believe in practicing dual agency. I'd prefer that the buyers that come in have their own agent. And that may impress them to the extent that, we're not looking like we're getting greedy and trying to get both sides of the transaction and both commissions in that way. And then as you will market a property, if it does has attributes that are highlightable, making it an ideal Airbnb, you would want to highlight those and recognize them so that you could let the seller know that you recognize them, and maybe share with them some ways that you might market the property with those benefits or features and benefits that those attributes may have. Something like, well, it's located right in a area of town where you could walk to restaurants and movies and things like that. You would try to tell a story, if you will, as to how you would maybe sell the house if you were with a buyer and present the house to them. Now, if it's a Airbnb opportunity and you could sell it as an Airbnb, there may be someone that may want to buy it, as you suggest with your question, Raphael, as a residence that they may themselves want to live in. So all of those attributes that would be ideal for an Airbnb, I would think, would be something that a homeowner would appreciate if they were to become a homestead and owner of the property. One of the things with the short-term rentals, which is another way of saying how the Airbnb is actually engaged when someone rents an Airbnb, it's a short-term rental, is you have to be certain that the city in which those properties are located does not have any ordinances that would ban short-term rentals. Because it could be a situation where it's a homestead home, but maybe it has potential to be an Airbnb. So you got to look at both sides coming into the thing. Or maybe it's been used as an Airbnb, but maybe you want to market it to both Airbnb people. And so you would want to be on your radar what's going on in the city council. Now, one of the things we do at GMAR is we have a government relations staff person that their role is to identify and communicate where there's some of these ordinance coming about in some of the communities that could be adversely affecting property rights and homeownership rights. Let me tell you a quick story about short-term rentals as it relates to a real-world situation in the market we're in. Did you know that in a situation where, and we've had many transactions over the last couple of years because of the short inventory supply, where a seller will basically sell their house to a buyer, but they'll ask the buyer for a possession escrow agreement, meaning they want to remain back in the house for a number of days, maybe weeks, until they can secure housing to move out of that house into their new house. That's a short-term rental. So if the city of Royal Oak were to decide, well, we're going to ban short-term rentals, they could in fact impact many real estate transactions that are driven by the current market situation and short inventory and possession escrow agreements, where the seller needs to stay behind because they didn't want to buy a house, so they knew they sold their house. Number one, they maybe needed the equity to do that. Some don't want to jump out of the frying pan into the fire until they have a place to jump to. So they may do a short-term rental. So you kind of have to be aware of that. And I think that, we do a pretty good job at GMAR of circumventing and preventing cities from passing, bans on the short-term rentals based on that example I gave you, because if they did so, they would be banning the possession escrow agreements in a real estate transaction. So the other thing to say is the short-term rentals are, important a part of our economy. And we as realtors and as an association do not want, and it just even myself personally as a realtor, I don't want to damage the neighborhood. People say, yeah, I'm okay with short-term rentals and Airbnbs as long as it's not in my neighborhood. That's what people say. Human nature. But there's a challenge sometimes in some of the communities where the cities aren't even implementing their standard rental ordinance. You know what I'm saying? Ordinances on, long-term rentals. They're letting tenants that have a single-family home let the grass grow too long and, let things fall apart outside and so forth. And so we're the advocates for all of our members and all of our realtors and our clients. We want to let them know we have their backs as far as um, protecting their property rights and home ownership rights.
That's excellent. I really appreciate that. And that term, possession escrow. Now, I've done something like that in a transaction with investors, and it's wonderful to actually hear the concept that describes that. You see, there's so many things that happen, on a case by case basis, and you're always learning something new. That's what I love about real estate. You never stop learning, it never gets stale.
And I've been in this business 32 years, Raphael, and I'm not done learning. I learn something new every day.
Hey, that's wonderful. Now, as you know, most of our audience are comprised of athletes, student athletes, professional athletes. And because you graduated from an interstate rival here, two schools here that hate each other's guts, I have to ask you, uh, do you root for the maize and blue or the green and white?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll tell you a quick story on that. I spent more years. I spent 4 years for my undergrad degree there at U of M, so I probably lean towards U of M in a U of M Michigan State game. Now, I try not to, get too boisterous and excited and jump up and down if I'm with my friends and we're watching the game together. I will remember a time when I was, I think I was a sophomore at U of M, and we went to see the U of M Michigan State game in East Lansing.
Oh boy.
And I'll tell you what, I was probably younger then. Well, I was younger then. I was a little more outspoken then, and I was cheering for Michigan right there in the freshman section, or the student section at State. And there's a few people that were getting pretty angry with me, so I had to tone it down. But I support both teams. If Michigan State is not playing Michigan, I obviously am all behind them. But unfortunately, I must have some maize and blue in my blood or something. I was there during the Bo Schembechler years, and my freshman year in 1971, I actually went out to the Rose Bowl with Bo and the team. And
Wow.
now we lost to Stanford because Michigan, and no, Bo Schembechler was always known for the running game. Well, this was the only time we would meet some of these Pacific teams was in the Rose Bowl, because the Big Ten was the Big Ten. There were only 10 teams, and we all played each other, and we never saw anybody else. Well, that's certainly changed now. My point is, we didn't have a passing game, and guess what? Our pass defense wasn't very good, and Stanford was passing the ball and scoring touchdowns, and we lost that game. But it was a fun trip, and since then, Michigan has had to adapt to the change of playing all these other teams that have passing and not just a running game. But I hope I haven't alienated any of your audience here. But
I wouldn't worry about that if you did, President Kozak, because what you have shared with us is so rich, and not many people can say that they were there when Bo Schembechler was the coach. I was at Michigan when Lloyd Carr was the coach. In fact, I was a freshman when they won the national championship in 1997.
Beautiful.
And yeah, Charles Woodson was a big time there. He won the Heisman. And so that was a very special year. And then it took a long time for them to get back there and do it again.
Yeah.
And so we are very grateful to you, President Kozak, for joining us today. And we want to thank all of our viewers for watching this episode of Premier Insights Podcast. I want to encourage you to wisely invest your talents and resources for the greatest ROI, and that's eternity, because only what we do for Christ will last. See you next time.
Thank you.